Hello, all, and welcome to Murder at the Round Table. My name is Raf, and I am joined today by my awesome co host, Ipsha.
Hi. I actually waved. I don't know why I waved.
All right, so, as per usual for my episodes, how are you doing? How's life? Any recent events we want to talk about?
Well, the weather's nice.
Yeah,
The weather's getting better. I don't think it might not last, but it's getting better. I got my nails done yesterday.
nice,
It's
nice.
like, it has blueberries on it, so it's giving very much like grandma's casserole platter vibes.
Grandma's casserole, what vibes? Platter vibes?
Yeah,
Okay, interesting.
yeah.
So I know where we're both from, and I'm not sure if it's our grandmas that we're thinking about.
No, other grandmas.
Yeah, okay, sick. Yeah, weather-wise, it's been weird. I think I'd messaged you earlier the week about it. I was like, why is one day like snowing and then the next it's like summer? And you were like
Really nice. Yeah.
saying like Mother Nature's going through a breakup or something.
With what? We don't know.
I'm like, oh yeah, that actually makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, with what? With who? I don't know.
Yeah. Like, she need a friend?
Yeah, so for today's pre-segment, I just wanted to do like a very tiny vent on the new Avatar live action show. You know me,
Mm.
I'm obsessed with TV. And I'm also a really big fan of the original show and the books and everything.
Yeah.
So honestly, when I was watching it, it was so easy to hate watch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's so many things that they've either added or removed from the show, and that's very like fan service or like speaks to some, I don't know, additional message that really wasn't there.
Yeah.
Lots of blended storylines, some good, some bad. Obviously, I won't give any spoilers, but there are quite a few changes that
Mm-hmm.
don't make sense with like lots of exposition, and sometimes it's added to explain some extra plot points that honestly aren't needed as far as I'm concerned. A few character assassinations,
Mm-hmm.
however, also some sweet moments that I think bolstered relationships developed in the original show, but like that's the key part. This is stuff that it's bolstered because it was in the original
Mm-hmm.
show rather than like something new in this. But anyways, it was an attempt. It was enjoyable in certain parts. Yeah, they
Yeah.
really did my boy dirty as far as I'm concerned. If anyone has seen the show and they have like a totally different opinion about it, of course, add it in, even though that's not typically our main topic of conversation. I'm always down to talk to people about like shows and movies and stuff like that. Have you seen it by any chance? Or the original?
No, I don't think I've seen either. Oh, I've seen parts of the animated.
Oh, the animated original on Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
Oh, but you haven't done like a full watch through. Okay, we should like sit down and like binge watch that at some point. I don't know.
Yeah.
If we ever find time, anyways, because we have lives. We gotta go make that dough. Unless, y'all want to listen to the podcast more and this can be like our go to source of income.
Oh yeah.
One day, maybe.
One day, one day.
Yeah, so, anyways, let's get into it.
Yeah, for sure.
Back in February, I started looking at this next case. I started looking at a next case just in general and got the idea to look up crimes of
Mm-hmm.
passion or those related to February 14th. Now, imagine my surprise when I found that one of the most famous massacres associated with the day had nothing to do with love, but with gang violence. For those unaware, I am referencing the infamous 1929 St. Valentine's Massacre. It
Mm-hmm.
reminded me that I've never actually researched gang or organizational crimes. I think there's quite a bit of tea to be had there, especially if we look at finances and drug trade crimes in addition to like crimes related to homicides.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, ooh, okay. This is like a new rabbit hole to jump into since the whole like Gnosis, I guess, trilogy is going to be wrapping up soon for
Mm-hmm.
me. So first, Ipsha, have you ever heard about this before?
I feel like I have.
Okay.
Maybe once you're telling me the details, I'll have something come back to me, but for now I'm gonna be like, no, I have not.
All right, that makes
Mm-hmm.
this very exciting then. Okay, so looking into this was really interesting. There was a lot of information out there,
Okay.
especially for something that is still technically unsolved, as well as a good movie called The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, very original name, released in 1967 1987 and directed by Roger Corman. It's pretty good. It covers the events leading up to and on the day of the massacre took place.
Okay.
So, though this will end up obviously airing not a bit late, but like a lot late past Valentine's Day, I guess, I would still like to, introduce us to this case. I'll begin by kind of like painting an image of the cultural and like societal conditions present, then with like a timeline that includes like some trial and investigation, some theories. Our main theory, I think, which is kind of a new one that solves it ish, and yeah, places where it's still like unsolved or alleged, and try to make a point to indicate those to people, and then we can kind of discuss in our amateur like opinions. Maybe we'll fill in the gaps and just sleuth our way through it.
Okay.
Yeah. So trigger warning for today is just pretty standard. It's just murder and violence, pretty typical. So yeah. So now starting off with kind of like a societal conditions. Do you know what prohibition is?
Yes.
Okay. What do you know about it?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that.
Okay. You've heard the term before.
Yes. You know what? You just define it. I don't know what it means.
Well, no. You probably think about the definition of prohibition. So
Yeah.
prohibition, it's not something we learned about here
Yeah.
in Canada all that much, but it was a society shaping era, and one that, I've always come across, whether it's been in shows or movies or books and such. And so the following is kind of a quick summary to paint the picture for us.
Okay.
So the prohibition era began in 1920 when the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified, which banned the manufacture, transportation, and sale of intoxicating liquors. This went into effect with the passage of the Volstead Act. Despite the new legislation, prohibition was difficult to enforce because, like, everybody still wants to drink. So instead, what you had was the increase of the illegal production and sale of liquor,
Yeah.
which was known as bootlegging, and the proliferation of speakeasies, which I used to think was like some sort of bar you go to listen to music, but it's actually like an illegal drinking spot. And both of those things, with the accompanying rise in gang violence and organized crime, which made sense because since the manufacture of intoxicating liquors, was banned and somebody had to do it, everybody still wanted alcohol, so who's going to do it? All the gangs and organized crime. So they get money, they get more powerful, and such.
Can I quickly add something here? So I remember, I don't know from where, but I think during this time, a lot of the states closer to the Canadian border were actually getting their alcohol from
Yes,
Canada.
actually.
Specifically from Alberta.
Yeah, it was mostly prairies, like Alberta and Saskatchewan. Actually, that was a point I was going to bring up later, that
Okay.
I actually, like, I've been to Moose Jaw in Saskatchewan, and they have this like tourist spot where you can go into like tunnels that supposedly Al Capone used for transporting liquor during Prohibition.
Ooh.
And I was like, oh, okay, that's something cool, because like when I went to Saskatchewan, I was like, what is there to do?
Okay. I would like to go there. We should go there.
We should. It's pretty beautiful. Yeah. So anyways, with like the rise in, gang violence and organized crime, it led to like waning support for prohibition by the end of the 1920s. And then in early 1933, Congress adopted a resolution proposing a 21st Amendment to the Constitution that would repeal the 18th, and the 21st was passed on December 5th, 1933, ending prohibition. So that kind of paints for us, what the landscape was like at this time, because you had gangs with a lot of power, you had also a lot of corruption in the justice system as well, and everybody was kind of uneasy, but it was like, well, we're still getting our alcohol, so you know what, it is what it is. So now for the timeline of events. Heads up, this is pretty contested.
Okay. I have my notebook.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with like a known-ish main timeline, and we will start on the day itself, and there'll be a little bit of working backwards and working forwards here.
Okay.
Let's paint the picture. So, February 14th, 1929. Inside a garage at 2122 North Clark Street, 7 men met up for purposes unknown. The men were all dressed very well, but unfortunately, they would soon be dead and become the victims of the most infamous unsolved crime in U.S. history, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Ooh.
The garage was rented by the George Bugs, in quotations, Moran gang, which controlled much of the north side's. So this is in Chicago. Much of the north side's like bootlegging
Okay.
work, while also handling much of the brothels and casinos.
George Bugs himself, isn't he like popular in true crime kind of history? Or am I thinking of someone else?
No, yeah, he is. He was a gang leader as well, kind of like at that same level as Al Capone.
He was called Bugsy, right? His nickname?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm thinking about the same person then. Okay, good.
Bugsy or Bugs. Yeah, so at 10:30 a.m., 4 or 5 men arrive.
Mm-hmm.
Eyewitnesses' account vary on this. Some dressed as cops. They enter and order Moran's men to move away from windows and the doors with raised guns. Neighbors hear a pop, look out to see a Cadillac drive off with the original men
Okay.
inside. So these are the men that came into this garage. Neighbor checks in, finds 6 dead but one. His name was Frank Gusenberg. He manages to say cops did it to Sergeant
Okay.
Thomas J. Loftus, who was a veteran of the 36th District Station, then dies at a hospital later.
The cop or the one that was
The
alive?
one that was left alive, the one who said cops did it.
Okay, got it.
So the day after, a coroner's jury watched police reenact the killings, the scene of the crime. So these were the men killed.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny May, who was dressed in like greasy brown coveralls, was lying on his back under a like jacked up truck, assuming that he was like repairing a wheel or such. He was a former safe blower hired by Moran as an auto mechanic.
Mm-hmm. Safe blower? What's a safe blower?
Safe blower. I think like the guys who'd put like the little detonation like charges on like safes to like blow them open instead of like cracking them.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Or at least that's what I understood from that. And then we have the Gusenberg brothers, Frank and Peter, who were two of the city's most, notorious goons and such.
Yeah.
We have James Clark, whose real name was Albert Kachelik, who is a convicted armed robber and a reputed killer.
Mm-hmm.
We have Adam Heyer, aka Frank Snyder, who was an accountant and embezzler. We have Albert Weinshank, a nightclub owner and a newly appointed official of the Central Cleaners and Dryers Association. And then we have an optometrist named Reinhardt H. Schwimmer, who just hang around
Mm-hmm.
the Moran boys, mostly so that he could like brag that, hey, he has these like underground connections and stuff. Same day, in Dade County, Florida, Al Capone is sitting in court for an interview with prosecutor Louis Goldstein, and they're investigating the murder of a friend and mentor, Frankie Yale. Now, this obviously provides an alibi
Mm-hmm.
immediately as to his like whereabouts. So like Mans was in court in a totally different state. A week later, we have a few things kind of play out. The investigation runs its course, and there's a few theories, which I'll cover separately.
Okay.
But for right now, I'll just stick to like main timeline stuff. So the main, I guess, fact of that happened a week later is that they found a burnt down Cadillac, and then less than a month later, we find President Herbert Hoover, who was sworn into office. Now, this is 7 months before the stock market crash, so, America is still doing Gucci, things are still okay. When he was being sworn in, he wanted to focus people's attention on the crime rate and prove the need for speedy justice, as it were. So he started looking into a case against Capone, and this situation did provide that opportunity as well. However, at this point of the investigation, there was no evidence that was found by the prosecutor in Chicago, George E.Q. Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing was a contempt to court charge based on a doctor's note indicating that he had bronchial pneumonia in Miami and was bedridden essentially.
Al Capone was or who?
Yeah, Al Capone
Oh.
was, yeah. So Al Capone had submitted once to not appear in court in March 12th when he had received the subpoena, just to get like his testimony about this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So his appearance in court gets reset for March 20th. Around this point, Hoover meets with prominent individuals in Chicago to find that it's very gang oriented.
Okay.
Capone does appear before the federal grand jury in Chicago on a separate matter,
Mm-hmm.
but it's on the charge of contempt of the court because they found out he was lying about that doctor's note. And he completed his testimony March 27th. He then
Right.
leaves only to be reassessed on contempt essentially again. And then that leads him to going to prison for 1 year till March 30th of the following year, so 1930.
Okay.
So now Al Capone is in prison. So then we fast forward to December 14th, 1929, where we have Fred Killer Burke, who was a well-known bank robber and hired gun. He smashed his car into another one in St. Joseph, Michigan, then killed a cop before going on the run. When police pursued and went to his home, they didn't find him, but found an arsenal of like 2 machine guns, 7 revolvers, 11 tear gas canisters, and ammunition.
Okay.
And when they did a ballistics test, it seemed to indicate that the machine guns were the same ones that were used in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Okay.
And one of them had been used in the assassination of Frankie Yale in New York, who was the friend and mentor for Al Capone and the reason why he was in Dade County in Florida when all of this was taking place. Well, when the massacre was taking place anyways. So, March 26th, 1931, Burke gets caught and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of the St. Joseph officer. And then we fast forward to 1940, where Burke dies from a heart attack in prison and doesn't provide us with like any more clarity on the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So this guy who happened to have the machine guns for this massacre just never said anything more about it. We just know that the guns were in his place. And that is our general timeline for this. So now we backtrack and we start going into the theories to try and fill in all of these different gaps.
Alrighty, let's go.
I'll start off with main theories. There are 5 or so. And then there is 1/6 one that came later that kind of seems to explain things a bit.
Okay.
So, theory number 1. The murder had been the work of this group called the Purple Gang, who were working out of Detroit. They may have been retaliating for a recent hijack of a truckload of whiskey. Supposedly, they had rented a room across the garage. The problem with this, though, is the men in the garage that were killed were not robbed. They were just killed. So, like, wouldn't they have tried to make the money back if it was because of, losing money because of that hijack?
They wouldn't necessarily kill off the people. They would have robbed them.
Well, they might still... No, they probably still would have killed off the people. It's just that they would have robbed them, too. But everyone still had their... Yeah, they still had their, like, possessions and stuff.
They just happened to be there.
Also, there was a mechanic and optometrist who weren't really involved in things present. So what would have been the point to kill them? It might have been a witness thing, so they couldn't, like, ID them. But yeah, so that was pretty much shelved right away. The second theory was that the killing could have been connected to an election in the 20th Ward, where Capone and Moran were supporting like different candidates who were running for election. And this didn't really stand because like there's not really any like further information with regards to this. Like maybe it would make sense, but then Moran wasn't killed. Not in this case. He wasn't one of the men who was there. It was some of his men, but he himself wasn't there.
Yeah, and this one feels a little bit random because, he wasn't there. But if this was the theory, then these murders kind of feel very off-ish, like very random in a way.
Yeah.
It would make sense if they wanted to scare the guy, but it just feels very random.
Oh, that too. Actually, yeah. Our third theory here is based off of a fight to control dry cleaning rackets. Since Albert Weinshank, one of the guys who was killed, was a central figure in the laundry business, so maybe the hit was actually on him and everybody else was kind of involved, but again, it doesn't really stand because what would be the point of cornering all of them in that garage? You might as well just call it a hit on just this guy.
Yeah, and there could have been a better opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and like all the dry cleaning businesses that he owns. So it could have been Moran himself, because he did drive by at the time and was done dealing with the Gusenbergs. Likely, though, he saw the cops and just kept driving. So maybe he's the one who orchestrated the whole thing. He's done with the Gusenbergs and he's like, yo, I'll roll up a few of my men in this so that I'm not like implicated or something. But again, this was quite the public blow. So it's like, sure, but it's like when you're playing chess and you're like unnecessarily sacrificing like really good pieces. Yeah, it doesn't really make much sense, or at least not to me.
Yeah. What's Moran's first name?
Oh, Moran, George. This is Bugs.
Oh, okay, Bugs.
George Bugs Moran, yeah.
You know what? He could have done it. We'll come back to that. Knowing his history, he could have done it.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. And of course, our final and most, I guess, intricate of the theories. Again, these are theories looking at different people involved other than Al Capone specifically. So for our final one here, we have the fact that Frank Gusenberg was blaming cops straight up. Dying words, cops did it. So we have some information that kind of support this, because considering the car and how the men looked, like it could have 100% been them. Maybe one thing I actually might not have mentioned. Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't think I actually mentioned it. So there was an eyewitness who indicated that they thought they saw a police squad car, and that some of the men who walked into the garage and left were wearing police uniforms. So this was quickly kicked to the curb because the men could have been imposters, and there was really no further reasoning given. However, a few days later, the investigation came up with an amended theory that the Moran's gang stole liquor from a crooked cop and they retaliated, but these cops were never named. Okay, but then now we have, in addition to the witness who said, hey, the vehicle that came up looked similar to a police squad car, there was another witness who got a glimpse of the guy behind the wheel and saw that the guy was like missing a finger, like it was very obviously amputated. This was not followed up, but just keep that in mind for a bit later. So in terms of reasons for like, oh, these, like why the cops did it, so there were like the two eyewitnesses, there were how these people were dressed, there was the fact that Frank Gusenberg said it. It also didn't help that after tracking down one of Al Capone's top executioners, Machine Gun Jack McKern, who he also sided with the theory that the cops did it.
Okay.
But that's pretty obvious, he probably would have. Like, if you're presented with the options of, hey, did you kill these people? We know you're Al Capone's top executioner. Or like, did the cops do it? Well, obviously, Mez is going to say the cops did it. The biggest problem of all of this, though, is if it was them, wouldn't they have just brought Moran and his men in and shot them, saying that they tried to run away, like to escape? It creates a very big hole in this idea that the cops did it.
Cops did it, yeah.
So in the end, all of this was just a huge mess. And at the time, David Stansbury was the lead investigator of the state's attorney office, and the only thing he was sure about was that Al Capone wasn't involved. But then at the same time, it was like, okay, who is most likely to be involved? And then you also have Hoover wanting to kind of clean up, I guess, crime. And it's like, hey, who's one of the biggest gangsters we're still trying to get rid of? Al Capone. So pretty much all the cards are not really working in his favor here. Now, however, with everything like we've covered, like I've said, it feels pretty damning that it's most likely Al Capone one way or another. Like, we just need evidence that kind of really solidifies it. Well, there is actually a totally other angle to this story, which I found covered very well by the Chicago Magazine, and it's based on information released from the FBI archive due to the Freedom of Information Act in 1967. So this brings us now to our last theory, kind of main theory, and I'm really leaning towards this guy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Called White. Well, at least that's what I've named it. Anyways. to be all dramatic. So this theory has its own little timeline. So during the 1930s, we have this guy called William Three-Fingered Jack.
Nice.
White, who was a tough, like, gangster type himself, criminal in his own right in the Chicago underground, and who is said to have lost his fingers in an accident of some kind, but the way he lost it varies. Some say accident when he was a kid, others say fight. So White was working as an informant for the feds, and then in 1934, well, January 1934, when people found out that White was working for the FBI, Mans was executed in his home, and the killers were never caught. All right, done deal. Case closed. We wash our hands here. We're done with this storyline. But wait, there's more. So, January 1935, so a year later after White has died, we have a bank robber named Byron Bolton, who was already in custody and was looking to reduce his sentence. So he names Burke, who we had mentioned before, and 4 other men, and says he was their lookout, saying that Al Capone ordered the hit. So this made headlines at the time, but was never used as testimony against Capone, which doesn't make any sense because that's who they were trying to pin it on anyways, right? So that kind of makes that whole testimony very suspicious. And so then this brings us to some juicy ass tea in the form of a letter.
Right. Okay.
So we got this guy who is working for the FBI. His name is Frank T. Farrell, and he writes a letter to Hoover with the following details. So he says that a 40-year-old former firefighter named William Davern Jr., who was the son of a Chicago police sergeant, had been shot in the stomach during a bar fight at one of the popular gangster restaurants back in November 1928.
Right.
This guy went to the hospital for a month after that. Before he passed, he named a few guys from the Moran gang, including one of the Gusenberg brothers.
Nice.
So he's in the hospital, he's there for a month, and right before he dies, he tells all of this to his cousin, guess who? William White. So according to Farrell, White calls up the Gusenberg brothers, or the one that is named by Davern Jr. here. So he calls up one of the brothers involved and says, hey, he's gonna I need to hold up a factory for its payroll, and I need some muscle. This wasn't a weird request because supposedly he had worked with the Gusenberg brothers before in a job back in 1926 to rob a factory of $80,000.
Right.
So, asking for muscle wouldn't be that suspicious. This could explain why the guys were all properly dressed up with the Gusenbergs, and they were all in the garage, essentially waiting for this guy. He then might have gotten his uncle, who is the father of the guy who was killed, so Sergeant William J. Davern, to help with and cover the massacre. So he may have helped with providing the police uniforms and the squad car, which now would make sense as to how they got access to that. And then with the cover up afterwards, so no one would really be looking at the cops. From this letter that Farrell wrote to Hoover, we get very clear motive, as well as a really well written out storyline, and kind of explains the passion of the crime as well. If this was a revenge plot, then it's he gets a group of men together and they're avenging a son of a cop who was a firefighter who was killed. They're avenging him by killing his killers, and that could explain it, why they weren't robbed or anything like that. Anyways, and essentially why things were kind of very hushed up, and why nobody really listened to, Gusenberg's, I guess, final words, as it were. This might also explain how our guy Bolton came out of nowhere being like, hey, Capone did it, reduce my sentence, to just further push, I guess, the attention from Capone to the cops. So, those were the two sides in this whole thing, right? You had Capone on one side, cops on the other, as being, the culprits of this whole shindig. So, Hoover receives the letter from Farrell, suggesting that White had been responsible. Now, the tragedy here is that it's dismissed as a local police matter, and Farrell was never heard from, and apparently recent attempts to locate his family were unsuccessful. So, like, maybe if there was more communication in White's involvement with the FBI, this case could have gone another way. Because maybe, like, if they knew, like, hey, there's this informant we have, he's involved with the FBI, but also he's involved with the massacre. Holy shit, we gotta put this guy in protective custody.
Yeah.
You know, or, but actually, you know what? At the same time, what happened to White might have still happened, because if the cops wanted to cover things up, even though he was kind of working with the cops to do this, if that was the case, it might have been like a whole loose thread situation anyways. Yeah, so that's a more like recent theory because of the Freedom of Information Act, which went about undisclosing some government documents, and this letter was found in the FBI archive, or is part of the documents that were disclosed or undisclosed, I guess. Yeah, undisclosed. That's the right word. Yeah, so I guess any thoughts right now?
So first of all, this time period, you had a lot of gangs. Not just Bugsy or Al Capone. You had more gangs. They're the
Yeah.
most known ones. From the very beginning, I kind of had this suspicion that it wasn't Al Capone, just because I don't know, like the stories I've heard about Al Capone and even Bugsy, it seemed like when they had a hit on someone, the crime was done so clean.
Yeah. And this was messy.
And this didn't feel clean. This was messy. And not only that, if the hit was on one
Yeah.
of those 7 people, you had all these like random people who are dying with them. And yeah, it just felt messy. You have optometrist
Yeah, the
in there, you
mechanic.
have other, yeah, it just didn't feel clean. From the very beginning, I think you were maybe at the first or third theory, I was like, I feel like this is an inside job of cops. That was my thing. Like, it just didn't feel clean, and it was done by someone who would originally not be in a gang. Maybe had some kind of like costumes or some dressing sense of cops, but wasn't quite done by a gang. With William Three Fingers, and then you said there was somebody who was driving the car with a missing finger, that kind of works out.
Yeah, which is something totally dismissed. And then, hey, we have this guy who just also happens to be the cousin of a dude who was shot by one of the Gusenberg brothers just a few months prior.
And it doesn't, I don't know if it's like a personal thing, but because he works for the feds and
Yeah.
he's an informant, you don't know, like, we don't know his history of his work as a fed. I'm not saying like bad things, maybe he's done great things, but like the federal government can't really come forward and be like, hey, this is this. But it just makes sense why it might have been covered up.
Yeah. Oh, actually, about that too. I think this was also potentially in the early days of FBI. I don't know if they had consolidated as much control and presence as they have now.
Okay, that would make sense, yeah.
Yeah, even if, he was working for like an FBI office in, this like one region, whether or not they were able to like communicate well with each other and share information, like different offices at the time, I don't know if that was a thing yet. So, and that again explains why, like, yo, somebody can come up, shoot up a garage, get in the car, drive off, and as long as they drive out of town, then
And leave, yeah.
burn up the car and stuff, you'll probably never find them unless you like, know who the car is registered to, or you find something else like that Burke guy who had the machine guns. But those machine guns could also have been placed.
Yeah, those machine guns could have been placed 100%. But I'm also thinking like, so he did work for the feds. The feds were like the FBI was like just starting up, so they didn't really have control over everything just yet. But they still had a way of protecting him, not to
Yeah.
such extent that they would today, which is why he was later shot in his own home. Yeah, so that makes sense. Yeah, but I honestly don't think it was done by Al Capone or Bugsy
So
because
messy, so public.
it feels so
Yeah.
messy. And even though Hoover did want it as Al Capone, but I didn't think the lead detective had reason unless he was paid off, which we would have probably found that out. So I don't think he was paid off, but he didn't have a reason to blame it on Al Capone, although there was enough reason to bring him to court and into trial. I just don't think it was one of them.
Yeah, there was a lot of pressure. I think it all played out in a way that like Capone was someone that, everyone really wanted to get and was a great focal point because he was so public. People kind of had their suspicions about his gang activity.
Mm-hmm.
Getting him in would be a win. He could be kind of like the lightning rod of hate, as it were.
Yeah.
And I could really see that playing out here. Kind of actually similar to the last recording we did. I remember saying the exact same thing about that family, that they were just a lightning rod for hate in the community, which also didn't help with their actions either. They kind of bolstered that image, but
Mm-hmm.
so I'll finish off with like some like closing remarks on this. So when Capone finally gets imprisoned for tax evasion, which is its own separate story, really interesting. He ends up in prison for 11 years, during which he never spoke on the massacre or gave any indication at having been involved in it.
Yeah.
Because he
Because
wasn't,
he
or
wasn't.
allegedly wasn't. Yeah.
I don't think he was.
I actually have a note here about Moose Jaw, and I'd mentioned that like I'd been there before, and I've always been interested in like his whole storyline. So maybe one day I'll just do like the story of Capone, which might
Mm-hmm.
have to be split into various episodes. We shall see.
Yeah, maybe in a bit because I just listened to a
Yeah,
podcast about Al Capone, so it's fresh in my head.
yeah, but now I kind of want to do just like a full episode or like set of episodes. Yeah, life controversies because there were quite a few of those. So one thing for sure is that
Mm-hmm.
we still don't know anything quote unquote legally conclusive on the St. Valentine's Day massacre, but just that the crime, added to Capone's legend and also played a great role in ending his career. Because even though
Mm-hmm.
like I said before, like Americans were not happy with the situation, obviously, with prohibition, all the gangs getting stronger and such, and crimes being rampant, and justice system being corrupt. But at the very least, it could be tolerated, for the sake that people were still getting what they wanted. But this was so violent and public and out there that it was like, okay, you know what? Enough is enough. And
Mm-hmm.
then Capone being put in front of everyone is like, hey, this is the guy who did it. You turned the entire country against the man. But anyways, I'm talking about him like he was an angel or something.
Yeah.
Obviously, was not.
I had a different thought for a
Mm-hmm.
second, but I just don't want to be that sleuth who's creating more theories to complicate things and create more conspiracies than doesn't need to be there.
But
Okay, so can you remind me, do we know who shot William Three Finger Jack White?
no, they never found his killers.
So, what if William Three Fingers at this point, at a certain point, was willing to come
Mm-hmm.
out and admit, but the feds were the ones that killed him, and that's one thing. I'm feel like I kind of stopped thinking about it because it just complicates it. So he's been
Well,
working for the federal government. It doesn't have to be FBI. We don't know what he was working for. He probably has done things or seen things that nobody else has seen or heard of
mm-hmm.
ever. So, him being part of this mission for whatever reason and
Mm-hmm.
killing these people, he was willing to come out and say something. And the federal government, the FBI, even they were starting up, they were like, no, this is not happening. They got rid of him just to shut him up. But I'm thinking, what if it wasn't the Gusenberg brothers they were after? It was somebody else in this group that the federal government or someone else was after for whatever reason.
There was somebody else in this group that they were after.
Yeah, but that's where I stopped thinking because I was like, this is getting complicated and probably messy, and I'm probably going way off the rails.
Well, that's part of the reason why we got all of those other
Yeah.
theories because so ignore the optometrist and the mechanic. The others could have had genuine reasons. That and the accountant ish. Like, Albert Warenshank had involvement with, some laundry businesses,
Mm-hmm.
which were, pretty good sources of income for some of the gangs, right? So somebody could have been coming for him. You could have had the Gusenberg brothers, who were well known. Somebody could come for either one of
Mm-hmm.
those. And actually, it turns out, like with the White case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody was gunning for them, and whoever else was involved in
Mm-hmm.
Davern Jr.'s death.
Yeah. So again, I went totally off the rails with the last part, but I'm still thinking that it could have been undercover cops by the feds themselves to kill White. Regardless, it was messy.
It was a messy, yeah.
If the hit was just on the Gusenberg brothers and it was done by a gang, I feel like they could have killed the brothers, cornered the brothers on their own. Maybe that would have more or less indicated that it was because of that firefighter who passed away or was shot, but I guess maybe that's why all these other people had to be involved or something like that. But I feel like William Three Fingers knew something about the feds, and the feds just needed him to not come out. That's my theory.
Yeah, no, and it's a fair theory. So with William, there is one witness. I guess I didn't mention. Yeah, I did mention there
Mm-hmm.
was one witness who lived on the first floor and pointed out like two people from like police photographs, being like, "Oh, those were the like last two men that they'd last seen." But that again, like that was the
That
extent.
was really good. That was really good. Good job.
Oh, thank you. So I think at some point we should take a look at the movie because of like everything that it kind of covers.
Mm-hmm.
I started watching it and like I haven't seen the end yet, so I don't yet know like what theory they're actually going to end up going with, but we will see. I think they're going to go with the Gusenberg though, like the whole relationship with Gusenberg and Davern. I really want to say Davenport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was about to complete that. No, Gusenberg makes sense, but I'm kind of wondering why it was a messy job.
The passion of it.
Yeah, it could have been just possible that it was not done by a gang. That's why it was kind of not clean,
Yeah.
which makes the most sense to me.
Oh wait, hold up. What if? What if we're all wrong and it was a brand new gang that was trying to establish itself that found out about this meat and was just like, we can do this. And then they went and it got all messy in public and they're like, you know what? Nobody's looking at us. Let's not say anything.
Entirely possible because you have people in that garage that had connections to the underground. And I'm looking at Albert, who was the owner of the nightclub.
Yeah.
Nightclubs, pubs, casinos were huge at this point for underworld underground.
And laundry businesses.
Apparently laundry business. That one's new to me. Yeah, so yeah, you have prominent names and prominent people who have big huge connections, so it makes sense. But again, it's so freaking random to me. So it's not sitting well that it would be like a proper gang, maybe an amateur gang for sure, but it's a little bit weird.
No, that's true.
Well, thank you for that, Raf. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Oh, sick. I did too. I honestly thought I was probably just gonna find like some crazy crime of passion story. But then I came across it and I was like, oh, okay. Cool. This is an interesting little nugget. But yeah, so I guess we can close everything off. So thank you for your time, y'all. Not sure what else I'm going to investigate, but we'll see. Probably closing off the hypnosis trilogy situation. Just I think I've mentioned it before, just looking at like how forensic hypnosis has been used in courts in any cases we know of, or big cases where it's been prevalent, and how it helped with the situation or detracted. That would be interesting to find as well. But yeah, so that's it for me. So please take some time to comment, like, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, whatever else you're seeing this on, and tune in for another session next time. Where do we know what's going to be next?
I think so. I think I'm going to take you back to Nahani, Raf. We're going to talk about some curses.
Oh, sick. Okay. I'm down for some voodoo curses. I'm down.
Yeah. So I think I want to talk about curses because I think they come up a lot when you talk about, not even just in Canada, but also in the United States, when you talk about mining or coming across land that was indigenous land before.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Like anything to do with like death in like natural places.
Mm-hmm. So I think I'm kind of wanting and hoping to lay a foundation and that we can come back to in the future and being like, you know what, we talked about this in Nahani. There's something similar. So maybe, hopefully, and there's so much. Every single day I'm finding new things about this place, Raf. I don't think I can ever close the chapter of Nahani.
Yeah, no, that's just totally fine. Beauty of a good story. And who knows, maybe even like within the next year or two, there might just be some more stuff that ends up coming out. We could actually, it would be really cool if we got someone, like a guest who was also knowledgeable on Nahani and we'd like had a conversation with them on like an episode at one point. That'd be cool.
That would be cool. I haven't heard many people who know about Nahani, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's a wait and see process.
Yeah, in that case, thanks y'all for listening again. And if you got any more details that I missed, some corrections, some additional tidbits you think we'd like to know, please add it in the comments. It's down to learn more about any of the cases that we cover. With that, I guess we're done. Bye.
Bye.